Welcome to MidwestCon 2023. I'm Rob Richardson, founder of Disrupt Art and also host of the podcast Disruption Now. We're here live at the Digital Futures Building, and I'm here with my next guest, Aswad Thomas actually, and he is the VP of the Alliance for Safety and Justice, the largest criminal justice organization in the nation. They've been responsible for reforms that have happened, essentially the largest criminal justice reform we've ever seen in this nation. And this is really an important point to me. We spend more money than any nation by a lot when it comes to locking up people. And you think we'd be the safest. The only thing we're the best at is locking up the most people and spending the most money and ruining as many lives as possible. There are better ways to approach safety. There are effective ways to approach safety, but first we have to change the narrative. And with Aswad Thomas, we're going to talk about that in his role and what he's done in his story. In particular, we're going to talk about the head of his organization too, Lenore Thomas, who's also been on this podcast. We're going to talk about that book, In Their Names, which is a wonderful book. There are two books that everybody must read when it comes to criminal justice reform. The first is In Their Names. You need to read that. The second, many of you probably have read, which is The New Jim Crow. If you are at all interested or curious about why criminal justice reform is the most important civil rights topic of our era, you need to read both of these books. They're both a must. We're going to talk about the first in our podcast. We'll see you on the other side.
If you believe we can change the narrative, if you believe we can change our communities, if you believe we can change the outcomes, then we can change the world. I'm Rob Richardson. Welcome to Disruption Now.
Aswad, thank you, man. How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah. So, tell me, what is your passion?
Man, that's a good question. I'll start with what was my first passion. For me, basketball. You know, I was born in Hartford, Connecticut. I spent most of my childhood in Detroit, Michigan. You know, grew up in a single parent home, you know, the youngest of 5 boys. And so for me, you know, growing up in inner city community, you know, it was like 2 things that I thought that I would, you know, need to excel at in order for me to help make it out of my neighborhood. One was my academics, and the second was basketball. You know, that was a thing that, you know, kept me out of trouble. That was the only safe place that I had in my neighborhood to really get away from, you know, the things that surrounded me, the poverty, the violence. As well. So I ended up going to college. I became the first male in my family to ever graduate from college, and was also on my way to play professional basketball overseas. So for me, basketball was my passion, but things happened in my life and opened up a new chapter, a new passion of mine, which is traveling the country organizing crime survivors.
Well, Tell me what happened. I mean, I know from the book In Their Names by Lenore Anderson, so I know something about your story, but your first passion was basketball, but you know, the universe and everything took you another direction. How did that happen? Yeah,
so 2009, you know, for me, that was the highest point in my life. I just graduated from college, the first male in my family to ever graduate from college. So that was just a historical moment for myself, my family, and also for my entire community. And I was also a star basketball player as well. But unfortunately, 2009 became the lowest point in my life when I was, just leaving the corner store in my neighborhood in Hartford, Connecticut. I was shot twice in my back. And those bullets nearly ended my life and ended my professional basketball career as well. You know, I remember being in that hospital bed and my doctor, coming to my bedside and saying, you are a victim of gun violence. You have 2 bullets stuck in your back. And we don't know if you will be able to play basketball again, let alone we don't know if you'll ever be able to walk again.
How did that feel?
And that right there, that's when it hit me. It hit me because I worked so hard on the basketball court to hear that, I may not be able to play professional basketball again. It kind of brought me to a stage of depression. It brought me to something that I was good at, something that I spent hours of training, hours of perfecting my craft. Within a split second, was gone away by two bullets as well.
Wow. So walk me through the moment when you, after this has happened, I know that then the police came up and started their investigation. What happened when that occurred? What was take us through that.
Several things happened during that moment. One, I was released from the hospital back into the same neighborhood where I was shot, because that's where I lived. And I remember being discharged from the hospital. My doctors and the nurses, they told me about the physical challenges that I would have, right? But nobody never mentioned the psychological effects of being a victim of gun violence and having to live in the same neighborhood where you was shot. So during that recovery process, I was struggling with the PTSD, the flashbacks, the nightmares, the depression, the anger, the isolation that I was going through. And so during this time, as I was recovering, law enforcement came to visit me. And, Rob, every time they came to visit me, it was always about the case. I remember them asking me, hey, what were you doing outside at that particular time? Did you have any conversations with anyone? Have you been involved in, anything that could have led to you being shot? And here I am, recovering from, these bullets on my mother's, couch. I'm saying I just graduated from college, right? I'm a star basketball player. I've never been in trouble at all. And so right then, those interactions with the law enforcement actually became more stressful.
Yeah, because the assumption was made. The assumption was made that somehow, like, it's victim blaming, whatever, you deserve what happened to you. Something must have happened for that to happen. They shot you for some reason. And I guarantee you that story, if they walk over to the suburbs of, it was Baltimore, correct?
Hartford, Connecticut.
Yeah, Hartford, Connecticut.
Yeah.
If it was suburbs in Connecticut, and perhaps your skin looked a little different. Yeah. The conversation would have been, we're gonna make sure the people that did this pay. How can we go about helping you? Yeah. And people don't understand that our interaction with law enforcement, unfortunately, that's what you went through is not unusual. It's the commonplace. Yeah. Like, I know another person who had a story where he had to actually defend his life, and he had done everything right in his entire life too. Had a spotless record, and because he didn't have a lot of money, they made him cop to they didn't make him, but essentially he felt like he had to do this because he didn't have $100,000 to spend on an attorney to defend him, though he clearly had all the facts on the side. But they asked him the same question. They said, look, well, they assumed he was a gang member, and no, he was a Marine, and they're like, wait, what? And they still, it didn't matter. Wow. Like, they only saw one thing. Yeah. And they knew the person that he had to shoot was actually a well-known gang member and had done things to people, but he was assumed to be somehow in the wrong. Yeah. So they had to find a way to get a charge. They said, well, we got all that, but somebody got killed, so we got to charge you with something. Wow. And so they didn't. He served hardly any time, but he had a felony on him for the rest of his life. Wow. And then that affected. And then he didn't appreciate how that hangs over you. So let's talk about that. Yeah. You're in a hard field, man. Yeah, very difficult. Yes, it is. You are in a very hard field. Yeah. It's a noble problem. You and I agree with it. But what motivates you day in and day out to keep going when you have such headwinds? So
that's a great question. Several things. One, the experience of a black male who's been a victim of gun violence. I know that all too well, firsthand experience of being a victim of gun violence. But I actually come from a family of victims of gun violence. My father was shot in the 1980s. My brother was shot in the 1990s. I have two cousins that were shot in the 2000s. Like, all of us had interactions with law enforcement. All of us had some interaction with the justice system, but none of us never received any type of victim services, any type of mental health, or any cause or concern for our well-being after being victims of gun violence. So in my immediate family, 5 out of the 10 males are victims of gun violence, and 6 out of the 10 males have came in contact with the criminal justice system as well. So I'm impacted by both sides of it. As a victim, and also my brothers have been incarcerated. My oldest brother has been incarcerated for the past 22 years, right? So that's the one thing that kind of started me to think about the impact of the cycle of violence that happened, how that often leads to people coming in contact with the justice system. The second thing was during my last doctor's appointment to remove the bullets out of my back. My doctor, as he's performing surgery on me, he started to tell me the story of this other young black teenager from my neighborhood who he had treated 4 years prior. So that young man, as my doctor was describing to me, was 14 years old. He was shot in his face at the age of 14 years old. My doctor saved his life but couldn't save his eye. And like the more details he started to share about that young man, as I'm sitting on the operating table, my heart started to beat fast, Rob, because he was describing the young man that shot me. And I remember telling my doctor, Marshall, said, hey, I don't know if you know this, but you just described the young man that shot me. And I knew that because of the patch that young man had on his eye. When my doctor was sharing that young man lost sight in his eye and we sent him home with a patch. That's for me when I made that connection. It was that young man. So just wanna dive deeper into that, right? So that teenager at the age of 14 years old was a victim of gun violence, was released from that same hospital back into that same community, just like me, not connected to any services at all. And then 4 years later, he played a role in shooting me 4 years later, right? And so that unaddressed trauma that he was experiencing, right, that often leads to people coming in contact with the justice system. So, we just released a new study.
The trauma.
Yes.
Like people think, because I was going to get to, that in the book talks about that in their names, about really addressing trauma. Like, because that I'm guessing is, you feel like one of the keys to actually reducing violence in our community. Talk more to that. Yeah,
it's the key to reducing violence in our community. It's also the key to reducing incarceration, right? So we just released a report this year called The Road to Redemption. So our organization, the Alliance for Safety and Justice, we have two flagship programs. One program is called Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, which is a national network of over 180,000 crime victims from across the country. The other part of our program is called Time Done, which we have 200,000 people who are living with past convictions, right? And so we bring these two constituencies together to call on a better criminal justice or a better public safety system. In the report that we did this year called The Road to Redemption, we found out that 9 in 10 people who have a past conviction have been a victim of a crime before they went into the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
Right? So being a victim often leads to two things. One, it can lead to being re-victimized again, and it often leads to coming in contact with our criminal justice system. And that's where we have failed communities, especially black and brown communities in this country, by not focusing on the victimization that people have experienced.
But of course, that's what the narrative that was put forward when all of these laws that were supposed to protect us. The narrative that was put forward, it was always somebody that they put forward that was an awful victim, right? That's something like the worst facts you can think of. It happens, and then that usually led to some huge change in the law that was supposed to protect people, make communities safer. It did not do that, right? We know what happened. That's how we got to where we are now. But to your point, there's hardly any money spent. Almost zero. Relatively speaking, when it comes to helping the victims who were actually affected. Right? All of the money goes to pay for everything else. The militarization of police, the parole officers, the big correction facilities. None of it goes to the victims. People are like, so it's interesting, people talk about the victims, but I don't care your talk, right? What do you show me what you spend money on, and I'll show you what you value. And it's not the victims, right? It's it's everything else that's supporting our huge national incarceration system that's making a few people wealthy, providing jobs for a few, but taking away so much opportunity for others. I mean, that's why I'm so passionate about what you guys have done, and you've been a great supporter of the podcast. But before that, even if you weren't, your work is very important, and it is the seminal civil rights issue of our time. So something that we're going to talk about more tomorrow is in technology. They say to have the greatest impact, you need to know the problem you're solving, right? And Lenore talked about this on our show. We need to flip the narrative of the problems that we're solving. And I don't want to focus too much on that because we're going to talk about that more later tomorrow when we get more into our talk. But I do want to talk about changing the narrative because it's a similar conversation. How do we change the narrative about crime, given that we have forces that are so effective at marketing, so effective at simplifying a message that's emotional? How do we do that, given that?
Several things that we can do. One, when we think about mass incarceration, who played a key role in mass incarceration? It was law enforcement, it was politicians, and it was crime victims. But it was a very narrow voice, and media played a key role. And also thinking about, we have to, make our communities safer, right? That was the call to action, right? And we also listened to crime victims who supported those policies as well. But one thing we haven't did for the past 40 years is actually listen to the crime victims that are most impacted by violence, right? So that's what our organization have been doing for the past 10 years of building this movement across the country and asking crime victims, what does safety look like to you? And what crime victims are saying across the country, these are crime victims who are victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, parents who've lost loved ones to homicide, victims of gun violence like myself. For crime victims, safety is actually more trauma recovery centers to help people heal when they have been victims. Safety is about preventing violence from happening in the first place. Safety is actually about getting people jobs so that they can help take care of their families. Safety isn't about funding people into this punishment system, because they have not worked for us for the past 40
and funded for life,
years. And funded for life, as you mentioned.
Because I think the bigger part of what you're saying and what often gets lost is people think that they're saying, okay, does that mean you're being soft on crime? Does that mean you're saying people, there's no prison? No, what we're saying is how we structure rehabilitation is not a part of it.
Exactly.
Right. Being able to come into society again, that's not thought of because once you make a mistake in any way, and if it's a felony, that affects everything for the rest of your life. And it's very hard for you to come back from that. And you got to ask, are we just throw away people here? And then what does that do? That creates more crime. But what I think we're up against right now, what makes me nervous, and I want to hear you talk about this, is there's obviously a rise in crime right now, or at least it seems, relatively speaking.
In some places homicides are down.
Some are down, but perception is reality. Right, and right now, enough of and I've seen this play before in the 80s and the 90s, right? We've just started to talk about criminal justice reform. We've just got people to understand the enormous amount of money and resources and injustice that happens. But I'm nervous about that other part of the brain that takes over from people when they're fearful. What can we do at this moment to keep people focused on the long term of safety and not settle for short term results, the short-term efforts that we know will take us backwards?
One thing we got to continue, we got to listen to the crime victims that are most impacted by it, right? Continue to listen to about what safety looks like to them. Also, we have to make sure we're uplifting some safety solutions, right? The things that help stop the cycles of violence. As I mentioned, the trauma recovery centers. We started with one trauma recovery center in California. Now we have 52 of these centers across the country that are in communities for people to get access to free mental health services, free counseling, free therapy support as well. So we got to build this infrastructure of mental health and victim services in the community. That's one thing that we have to do. The second thing that we have to do, we have to mobilize across the country. Every movement starts with the people. So that's why we are mobilizing crime victims and people with past convictions. These two constituencies that are most impacted by the criminal justice. We got to mobilize them. We got to build their power. We got to share their stories. We got to train them to be leaders and advocates. We got to train them to talk to the media, to go meet with your editorial board, right? To talk about what your safety priorities are, to go meet with local reporters, to talk about what your safety priorities are. We have to continue driving this message around uplifting these safety solutions across the country. If not, we'll go back to the 80s and 90s, which for us, it haven't made our communities safer at all.
Didn't work.
Yeah.
Aswad, okay, I got a couple of final kind of rapid fire questions for you. What does legacy look like for you?
Man, great question. For me, legacy look like, so we have about 400,000 members of Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice in Time. The legacy look like we need to be 1 million members strong in the next few years. I talked about only having 52 trauma recovery center. Legacy look like for me is that every community. How can people
become members?
How can people become members? So go to our website, www.cssj.org. If you are a crime survivor. www.cssj.org. If you are a crime survivor, join us. Membership is free. Okay. If you are living with a past conviction, you want to be part of a community, go to timedone.org. So building power through membership, advocating for more services and resources, and do what we've been doing over the past few years is changing state laws, state by state, and uplifting better safety solutions.
That's awesome. If you had a theme for your life, what would that theme say and why? It could be a saying, a theme.
It's something that my college basketball coach used to say to us when we used to be running those sprints, right? Running these drills. He always used to say, "You're never as tired as you think you are."
You're never as tired as you think you are.
You're never as tired as you think you are.
I like
right?
that.
And so we're those. If you're a student, right? You tired as heck from homework and preparing for the session. Keep going. Right, for survivors, you've been through an experience of victimization, or if you've been incarcerated, you can overcome so many different things. So for me, it's like that's my motto. What keeps me going is, despite how hard it can be, we're never as tired as we think we are. And we always got something left in us to continue fighting, to continue pushing.
I love it. All right, final question. You have 3 members of the board of your advisors for life, for business, or community advocacy. Tell me who these 3 people are and why.
Whew, you got some good questions coming from me, man. If you had ideal board members, right? Think of someone like Oprah. You think of crime and violence that's happened to African American women in this country and the lack of support. So having someone like Oprah, right, to help uplift what folks are going through in communities, but also being able to help empower others to give back to this movement. I think about folks like LeBron James, who come from the city of Akron, a community that has been devastated by violence as well. Being able to have LeBron join the charge, right, to help us build more of these trauma recovery centers across the country. And the third is just like your average, person who wants to get involved. Whoever, that could be a doctor, it could be a lawyer, it could be an activist in the community, like someone who wants to make this country better than it was before, because 2024 is a critical moment for criminal justice and public safety, but also it's a critical moment for our country as well.
It is. It's critical. It tells who we are and what our values are. So, Aswad, brother, good to have you on, man.
Of course, good. Thank you for having me here.
So we're joining you again, MidwestCon 2023, here at the Digital Futures Building at the University of Cincinnati. Rob Richardson here, CEO of Disrupt Art, also host of the Disruption Now podcast. We've had Aswad Thomas on our show. He is the VP of the Alliance for Safety and Justice. You can find more about them in the intro and the comments. We're going to put all the links so you can learn more about them. Obviously, you can always also learn more about what we do at Disrupt Art. We use the power of entertainment to empower creators and also empower brands, but we're also about social impact, and that's why we do everything that we do. We appreciate all that you do. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.